Hi, I'm Stuart McMillan, and as you know, right now I'm running a concept called Ballot Box Comics. So the idea behind Ballot Box Comics is I'm providing you with 3 possible ideas for 3 comics I'd really like to draw, but I am only going to draw one of them. So we're having a voting period between the 23rd of August and the 3rd of September 2017. Whichever of these 3 ideas gets the most votes, I am going to draw as a comic. Okay, now here are the 3 options for Ballot Box Comics. Option number 1 is called Ecstasy versus Equasy. Now this comic is about drugs and the way that we think about drugs. It's based on a research paper that David Nutt, the former UK drug advisor, published, where he was looking at the drug MDMA, which is also known as ecstasy. Now, MDMA is a fairly safe drug in terms of harms compared to other drugs out there. But David Nutt decided to not only compare ecstasy against other drugs, he decided to also compare the dangers of ecstasy versus other activities that we hold in our everyday society. So one of these was comparing ecstasy against horse riding, which was a fictitious drug that he called Equasy from equestrian. So he said that not only is ecstasy safer than all these other illicit drugs, it's actually of a similar risk level to horse riding. So with my comic, I'm going to draw upon and really build upon this work of David Nutt's to think about why we allow certain risky activities to happen in society, such as horse riding, such as skiing, such as eating certain foods, and why there are other things that are equally risky, such as drug taking or taking certain drugs that we think are totally immoral and that we're going to try and make as hard as possible for the people who choose those activities. So that's option number 1. I really hope you choose it, but I also really hope that you choose option number 2, which is called Notel. Now, Notel is about television and the impact that television has on communities and community participation. This is based on a research study that I found from the 1970s. Now, television had been in North America since the 1950s, almost universally, except for one particular town in Canada, which just through a mountain range blocking the transmission signal, wasn't able to receive television in the late 70s. So they were 20 or so years behind the rest of the country. This was about the news that this town was going to get a television transmission tower built next to it. It would suddenly be able to get television. The researchers decided to go to this town and really track how the community participation varied before and after the impact of television. So what they found, in a sense, was community participation in sports, in civil clubs, in volunteering, in local politics, really nosedived after the introduction of televisions. This comic is set in the 1970s and involves television, but I think it's still relevant to us today, even though we're now in the Netflix and online streaming era. I think that many of us still have the same behaviors that the people did back in the 1970s, where we are choosing to, instead of going out and being in social clubs and doing things with other people in our communities, we are choosing to spend our evenings in isolation at home, watching the world through a television or through a computer screen. That's option 2 that I really hope that you'll choose, but I also really hope that you choose option number 3, which is called Trim Tabs. Now, this is another comic about my hero Buckminster Fuller, who I've already drawn 2 comics about. This is a comic that's a metaphor for social movements in the world. Buckminster Fuller, he would often pose this as a question for his audiences to think about. Buckminster would say, now how do you turn the direction of a ship? And people would think about that and they'd say, well, to turn a ship, you turn the rudder, right? Buckminster Fuller would go even further than that. He'd say that, well, if you want to turn the rudder of a ship, you need to influence a very small part of the rudder, which is called the trim tab. Once you turn that very small part of the rudder will turn, and once you've turned the rudder, the entire ship will start changing its direction. I will draw this as a metaphor for how social movements function. Big movements like the anti-slavery movement, like the women's suffrage movement, actually began with a very small number of people who were choosing to influence other people, and then that would in turn change the whole of society. So I'm getting our readers to think about the way that they could be a trim tab to help to ultimately change the direction of the world. Alright, so those are your 3 options for Ballot Box Comics. Just to recap, option number 1 is Ecstasy versus Equasy, option number 2 is Notel, and option number 3 is Trim Tab. So these are the 3 options that you can vote for between the 23rd of August and the 3rd of September 2017. The way that you can choose between these is going to my Patreon page, pledging at least $5 per month, which will give you the ability to vote on these 3 options. Whichever one wins, I will draw up as a comic and share the whole making of process with you through behind the scenes videos. And whichever 2 lose, I will probably never ever draw. So this is your time to influence the Stuart McMillan comics that you read. Support my work by going to patreon.com/STUMCM. Thank you, and please get involved with Ballot Box Comics.